All right, well, welcome. We're going to take a few moments here to let some audience members pour in, and we will get started in just under a minute. All right, well, welcome. I am Jeffrey Richardson, Product Marketing Director here at Kochava, and we are delighted to have you here for this Kochava webinar event today that we're hosting. It's an ad budgeting workshop for marketers. So obviously, right now in the economic climate of the globe, a lot of downward pressure on ad spend budgets, and we hope to unpack some great tips and advice and mistakes to avoid with some of the experts we have with us today. Before we go into panelist introductions, I do want to just go over a couple of quick announcements. So number one, please submit your questions through the Q&A or the chat. We'll be monitoring both of those. We will have a dedicated time for questions at the end of the webinar event, but we also may try and pick off some of those questions throughout. So we love the engagement, we love the interaction. Please feel free to ask. There's no silly question. Number two, the webinar is being recorded, so we will make it available on demand to everyone who registered after the event. So don't worry about trying to capture screenshots of slides or take furious notes. This will be made available to you after the fact. And then lastly, there's only an hour really for today, and there's much more to discuss beyond that. So follow us online. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn to continue the discussion. And if you're facing budget cutting woes, like many marketers and brands out there, get in touch with us. We'd love to talk about how we can help you do that effectively. With that, let me go ahead and have our speakers introduce themselves, and we'll kick off just from left to right here, starting with Katie. So welcome, Katie.
Hello, thank you. So just a little about me. I currently work at Kochava here. I've been here for about the past 5.5 years. I manage our strategic consulting division of our Foundry team. So basically, we're just kind of an extension of clients' analytics teams, help them solve lots of unanswerable questions, just help them market more efficiently. Previously, I was actually on the client side before moving on to here, and I worked primarily in direct mail and email, and then kind of switched over to mobile with Kochava. So happy to be here.
Thanks, Katie. And Eli, our guest from Real Time Agency, welcome.
Morning, everyone. Thanks to the Kochava team for having me this morning. My name is Eli Ulinet. I am the Senior Director of Digital Strategy and Innovation here at Real Time, based in Denver, Colorado, although we are a global agency headquartered in London with about 60 folks across the globe, working across a bunch of different verticals, including healthcare, telecommunications, consumer tech, and a bunch of other verticals. So super excited to be here today and talk with you all.
Yeah, thanks, Eli. Kevin.
Thanks. I'm Kevin King. I'm also based out of Colorado, here in Louisville. I'm the previous Vice President of Marketing for Hasbro Digital and currently at Foundry for the last 4 years. I answer questions not immediately accessible through the Foundry, through the Kochava UI.
Yeah. There's a lot of data out there, and sometimes getting to the root of questions. I know, Katie, you said unanswerable, but I think that's where your team excels, right? Is answering the unanswerable. Well, let's see. Before we dive into the discussion, just a couple quick, stats. Many of you may have already looked through the 2023 IAB Outlook survey. We're seeing clear spend growth deceleration in terms of a year-over-year change, from 21 to 22 being about a 9% growth. Between 22 to 23, that's about 5.9%. So budgets are coming down in terms of the increase year over year. And the economic climate is leading to much more frequent reforecasting of media plans as well. So when dollars are tighter, obviously where you spend those becomes more important, and the shift of that happens more often. And last but not least, before leading up to this webinar event today, we did a survey on LinkedIn, a poll, if you will, and found that about 50% of the respondents said they're very confident with their ability to basically trim ad spend while not starving or sacrificing too much growth. Whereas an even split of 25% and 25% were in the somewhat and not very confident bucket. And so that's the crew that we're really here to talk to today. But even if you're in that big orange slice of the pie, you never know if there's something else out there you don't know yet. And so hopefully there's something in this for you as well. So with that, I'd like to kick off by talking about just some experience from the field. Each of you have quite a lengthy background in the space. And so Kevin, maybe we could start with you and just share something historically in your prior work where you faced budget cutting or needing to drive more efficiency and how you did that and what the outcome was.
Sure. Over at Hasbro, we were one of the early adopters of mobile apps, and we had at the time one of the top apps in the App Store. This was back when people would go to the App Store on kind of like a daily or weekly basis and see what's on top of the charts. And other apps were kind of doing burst campaigns and outspending us to rank higher in the App Store. And management was concerned because they didn't want us to increase our budget, but they wanted us to still have that pedigree of being at the top of the App Store. So rather than doing the daily and weekly marketing reports that were showing what is happening, we kind of flipped the script and talked about what was happening. Because when we looked at trying to buy in a massive amount of installs in a short amount of time, we noticed that you spike up in like DAU and maybe some initial purchases, but it flatlines after that because we weren't going for quality. So what we did was we changed our KPIs to be based off of what was happening last month and the month before and how that's affecting current performance rather than what did we do yesterday and how are those customers doing. And marketers today are kind of being asked to change their spend weekly, even daily in that slide that you were showing. And I think that's being done under the false belief that that optimizes spend. I'd ask anyone who is being asked to micromanage and show immediate performance, what are you learning from this? It kind of reminds me of the analogy of the stock market, of people who are day trading, who are trying to buy stocks when they're going up and selling them when they go down. And as you know, 99% of those folks don't outperform the market. So why would we do that in performance marketing? Most of the successes in my life have come from patience. And I've yet to see any of the clients that I work with come into Foundry and say, you know what, we do better than the competition. We optimize our campaigns quicker. We cut bad spending by the hour rather than by the week. So secondly, and this is a little counterintuitive, is that when we cut marketing spend, we increased market research spend. Hasbro is one of the best organizations in the world when it comes to focus groups and understanding who their customers are. So what we did is we realized that there were demographics we were underserving. Most importantly, women over the age of 35. We noticed that the spend behavior, while it was kind of neutral before that, with regards to gender, it deviated. Where on some of our products, men would spend less and women would spend more as they aged. And Katie's going to talk about A/B split test in some of her answers, but oftentimes we weight users equally. What I did was I weighted it demographically based off of primary and secondary demographics and reinvested in creative that focused on that. And the previous A/B tests were telling us, oh, this is your worst, this is your worst campaign and best campaign. The problem was the best campaign was the one that really was serving our lowest common denominator. Nobody really liked it, but nobody hated it. And that's why we kept on running it and rerunning it. When we said instead, here is our customer, here is who she is, here are her spending patterns. Immediately within 6 months, by targeting that consumer, we were able to raise revenue, multiple millions of dollars just in that primary demographic. Because our A/B test unweighted said, this is your worst ad. But when it focused on her, it was our best ad. So when you're asked to spend a reduced budget, that doesn't mean you can't increase it in some of the areas that increase your knowledge. That's what Foundry provides, but that's also what market research provides. So don't skimp out on those kinds of things.
That's really in depth, and I agree. The notion of a daily or hourly, like you said, right? That's just not, you can't pull those levers at that frequency and be effective. Eli, I know you've got a lot of experience as well. Any anecdote in the field you'd like to share?
Yeah, across the space, something that we see ubiquitously is varying degrees of attribution capabilities and measurement capabilities that a client might have. But the vast majority that we see are probably behind the 8 ball of where they ought to be in light of all of the privacy changes, in light of all the changes that we see across the industry right now as it relates to attribution and data collection. And the example that comes to mind, we work with a large healthcare provider. They're in 45 states. They have 1,200 offices, and we help them bring patients in the door. And one of the big issues that they had coming out of kind of the post-COVID era was they couldn't really tell, because of these disparate attribution and measurement systems, if it was people coming out of COVID and engaging with their offices more, or if it was something like the increase in social activity, social advertising activity that we led with them, that led to what was ultimately record-breaking years in 2021 and 2022. Ultimately, they said, well, we can't decide if this investment is doing anything, so we're going to cut back on all of that social spend. And that ultimately was disastrous for them. They saw huge declines in all of the patients coming in the door. Offices and the providers working in those offices were not happy with that overall decision. And it led eventually to a reactivation of that program. Problem with reactivating these programs is all of those learnings that we had acquired over the 2 years of success were out the door. We had to start from scratch again. And this on and off switch of investment versus non-investment that we often see, especially when people are trying to understand without a measurement system, without a good attribution system, how that investment affects their bottom line. That on and off switch is not usually the best way to go about understanding whether or not you're spending your money wisely, because of all those learnings that you acquire over the period of time where you're on, and what it takes to get back to kind of that baseline of success. So happily, we have been able to restart that program with this client, and they're seeing success again. And they now have the understanding of, oh yes, investment from some of these channels is what will drive performance on an office by office basis. So I think if there's anything to take away there, it's going that brand off strategy that you sometimes hear on search, or even turning off investment on the lower funnel, can often lead to some disastrous outcomes. And we would want to test things incrementally, not wholesale.
Yeah, did you get to have an "I told you so" moment in that equation where
we try not to?
That was good and thorough. Katie, from your end and your perspective.
Yeah, from my perspective, I'm going to go back to my direct mail days, just to kind of level set on a couple of things that I think are really familiar between direct mail and mobile. And we, with budgeting, direct mail, it costs a lot of money to send out a catalog or a magazine, something like that. And so you're always scrutinizing budget all the time, trying to figure out the best way to be the most efficient. And one thing that we found was the most effective, that we did a lot when we had to do this, was separating our house files, our actual buyers, into different segments of not only how much were they spending, what were they spending on. So were they buying like a t-shirt, or were they buying jewelry? What were they buying? But also into what channels were they buying on? So were they just buying in the retail store? Were they buying on the web? Were they buying in a combination? Were they primarily only using catalog? So trying to really understand holistic view of your customers. And I think of this now related to mobile and identity link and how you can kind of tie all your pieces together and then see, which different touch points, if a customer does these different touch points, do they have a higher likelihood to continue to have activity in the app? Do they have a higher likelihood to subscribe? Things like that. So I think that customer segmentation and really diving into that was really key and really important to us when trying to, in this case, cut our circ, but still, in mobile, just trying to cut your publishers to just the publishers that are going to be the most efficient for what you're trying to do. So that customer segmentation was really key to us. And also within that, I mentioned kind of dollars and how much people are spending, but we really added that into the mix as well to have a second component of not only where are they buying and what are they spending, but how often are they spending, things like that. And we would then create different marketing tactics depending on if it was somebody that, was really loyal to us, spent all the time. They got a different treatment of like a catalog. They would get a different cover, a different message on there than somebody who hadn't bought in a couple of years, but maybe this offer, when they did buy like 3 years ago, they bought a pair of pants, and this offer is really, really good for somebody who likes pants or something like that as an example. Then we would give them a different message. So you can kind of tie those things into mobile in what creatives are you sending to different groups and segmenting out. Using first party data was really important too, where we would actually send, if we were trying to do new acquisition, we would send our file to a third party who would model that and essentially make a lookalike model with all of our first party data, all of our customers, and try to find people who had not bought from us yet that look like those customers. And then we would kind of use that as our acquisition to go out. So kind of all those things tied in help to really help us focus on our core customers that we knew were going to, continue to buy, but also trying to have more of a targeted approach on acquisition. So we weren't just, spending money going out to people who didn't look like they were going to actually spend with us. And we found that to be pretty successful, but there was lots of A/B testing, lots of things that we had to do where we had to test different strategies, different scenarios to see what really stuck and what didn't. So we did have a couple, times when we had to reinvent the wheel, but I think that's just kind of the nature of how it works. But those were kind of some really key things that worked for us.
Yeah, and I was on the whole A/B testing, creative optimization, copy messaging, for ads. We won't go down this road, but I was listening to a podcast yesterday about generative AI and potential for that in that sector. And it's fascinating, also somewhat maybe scary, but but yeah, I think customer segmentation and the personalization, which you touched on as well, Kevin, with the anecdote about the female customer in that certain age bracket and tailoring something to them specifically. As we jump into the next topic, we have a poll that we would like to throw up here to the customers or to the audience here on just, if you are facing ad budget cuts this year, around what percentage of your spend are you being asked to trim? So feel free to answer that. Panelists, you cannot participate, so we won't skew the results, and we'll come back and take a look at those outcomes here in a minute. So we've talked about some great anecdotes. I'd like to talk about, and some of your comments already have kind of peppered in the notion of this, but what are some common mistakes that right out of the gate, when you face that, budget cutting moment, you have seen, you have made yourself, you have counseled clients away from, and maybe we can start with you, Katie, off the end of your last comment and just continue through there. Then we'll hit on Kevin and Eli.
Sure. So one common mistake that I see a lot, especially clients we work with now, is just looking at the surface level. So just looking at your installs by network and saying, oh, my installs and my click-through rate of my clicks to impressions, my conversion rate, all of that looks really, really good, or kind of average, or kind of comparing that across network without diving deeper into site, creative, tracker, really diving deeper into those different layers that usually unearth some interesting trends that you're seeing. Maybe there's certain publishers, like I was kind of mentioning before, that overall the network looks really looks like they're performing really well, but then when you kind of go under the hood, you see that certain sites have very like drastically high click-through rates or drastically high impression counts with no click counts or click counts and no impression counts. So you just I think just diving under the hood is really important to remember to do so that you're not just looking at the surface level.
And is that the same? I know I've heard the term vanity metrics thrown around sometimes too, where it's, the high level metrics that may not indicate quality or LTV. Maybe that's synonymous with the notion of surface level.
Yeah.
Okay. And Kevin, thoughts from you on big mistakes, ones you've made, but I don't know if you make mistakes. I'm not sure.
Oh, I've made plenty. That's how I got. No, it's cutting so when someone's faced with, say, a 25% budget cut, there's usually about 3 plans of actions, all of which I think are flawed. The first is cutting the CPI proportionally, and that jeopardizes the quality of campaign because CPI is not used for placement. eCPM is, or CPM, and that's going to be ultimately derived from your CPI composed against install rate. So by doing that, effectively, you're just lowering the quality of your placement. The second is cutting your worst campaign. You're looking at ARPU, you're looking at registration rate, and you're saying, I'm going to take the one with the worst average. And what that fails to do is look at the spectrum of users where the high quality users are, but where the over attribution happens, because on some of your best campaigns, you might actually be organically stealing 60, 70, 80% of the installs because they're coming in 2, 3, 4 days after the click and are actually not generating legitimate incrementality. The third is kind of a mixture of the two, and what I'm going to. So I think counterintuitively, what you want to do is increase your CPI and get statistical significance across all your campaigns. And I know this is the second time you've asked me to decrease spend and I'm saying increase it. So I'm going to get to this.
Yeah, what the heck?
And that, imagine that you have 4 different networks and you're being asked to cut your budget 25%. You have networks A, B, C, and D. You don't kill off the worst campaign. You don't lower the bids by 25%. I'd recommend you cycle your ads. You run A, B, C together, and you stop running D. And you do this in maybe one region or one country, and then you do B, C, D in one and stop A. And what that's going to do is going to show you where your influence overlaps, where organic poaching happens, and where the best quality comes from each of these campaigns. And ultimately, through blacklisting, optimization, and fraud mitigation, and managing your over attribution windows, that's how you're going to trim the fat. It's not by shooting your worst ad network. It's by finding where the fat is on all 4, and that requires surgical precision and multiple iterations across multiple territories to analyze.
You're talking about, like, instead of an axe, a scalpel approach, and
well, a scalpel, but you're not doing the cutting until you've done the exploratory. I mean, any of us who face surgery, you don't just go in and like, ready to get cut. You go to multiple doctors, you get consultation, they do x-rays, they do CT scans. So this is what this approach recommends of don't cut anything until you are sure, and make sure you have multiple iterations to make sure that you are sure. So the cycling will stave off the bleeding in that you will inevitably be cutting the volume of spend, but you won't be cutting off these campaigns or making the changes until you've gone through a couple iterations in this.
I like that. So to rephrase, I think instead of cutting a partner out completely right off the gate, or saying, hey, they have the highest CPI, we'll just cut them, or poorest performing, let's just cut that. cycle. Like I love the ABC and then stop D for a time, then up D, do BC, stop A, vice, okay.
I mean, I've worked with probably 250 ad networks in my career. And oftentimes in conferences, people will say, who should I be spending with? Who are the good networks? Most of them are good. Most of them are bad simultaneously. There's only a few that are truly so terrible that you should never work with. And most of those have already gone out of business. It's through almost all of these are capable of generating good performance if you have the right mechanics.
Yeah. But I know over attribution is a topic we probably could have a webinar unto itself on. So if that's a topic you want to explore further, whether you're familiar with it or not, reach out to Kochava. We can help, whether you're a customer or not. Thank you, Kevin. Eli, thoughts you have on mistakes that you've seen in the field and how to avoid them?
Time and time again, what we see across the board is the first components of any kind of marketing mix to go are upper and mid funnel in the face of economic headwinds, the need to reduce budgets, whatever it may be. And the why behind the reason there is pretty straightforward. It's because understanding how to connect the bright red line of attribution between upper funnel and mid funnel and your new customer and your sales and your purchases, whatever it is that you're tracking on the lower funnel, that's much harder to do than just tracking the lower funnel and getting some of that direct last click attribution on the back end. So many advertisers, especially right now, are looking on how do I cut mid funnel? How do I cut upper funnel so that I can reserve some budget for the most easily to prove out? And to us, that's a big mistake. Very often, the way that your clients or your customers are getting introduced are happening at the upper and mid funnel. You have to continue to fill those in order to see that success on the lower funnel, to maintain scale, and also to have higher intent on the back end. As someone comes into your system, don't you want them to know about your product already, be familiar with it, so you don't have to go through the minutia of it all and get them educated, get them knowledgeable, and then build that intent after they're already in the door? You're probably going to lose them. Anecdotally, we work with a large publisher, and they've come to us this year. Usually they sell products that are geared towards advertisers much more on the awareness side, the branding side of things. And they say, holy cow, all of our advertisers are coming right now and saying, we need a lower funnel product. It just goes to show kind of where advertisers' minds are right now in terms of how they're approaching their media mixes. But very often it's not the best route forward. The difficulty with that is, how do you set up a measurement system that incorporates the upper and mid funnel in a way that helps you understand how it's contributing to ultimate overall output? Something like an MMM, something like what you all offer at Kochava, that can help folks understand, okay, when I spend money here on branding, on awareness, on education and information, that ultimately contributes to a higher quality user on the back end when they come in the door. And that's what I would encourage people to stay away from, taking, to use your phrase, Jeff, the axe to upper and mid funnel. Instead, being a little more judicious about how we're approaching those components of the funnel as part of the overall marketing mix.
Yeah, I guess it could be an axe or a chainsaw style, budget massacre or something,
Exactly.
that could be a meme, I'm sure. Well, okay, so those are all, and I know, the next thing I want to talk about is some best practices, which we kind of had part and parcel with mistakes to avoid. But I guess just, Eli, let's right back in with you. Best practices, I know you touched on one in your anecdote as well from your experience, but anything just, 2 or 3 best practices to how you approach that budget cutting moment.
Yeah, there's 2 that come to mind. The first is on the fraud side. There's a lot of different ways to look at fraud, but even beyond just fraud, some of these tools also can provide us with insight into the quality of the placements that we might be leveraging. Something like Moat can tell us what viewability looks like. Something like Nielsen's DAR or TAR products can tell us what our in-demo reach looks like. A lot of times we look at just kind of the bottom line metrics, like what Kevin was talking about. We just look to what's our lowest performing campaign, and cutting that one. But ultimately, that doesn't tell the full picture. We don't look at the amount of fraud, the percentage of fraudulent traffic that's coming in for reaching the people that we actually are trying to reach from a targeting perspective. If the placements have poor viewability levels, we're probably missing the fuller picture of, are we spending enough money or too much money on some of these placements? And is there a way for us to cut back and be smarter with some of those buying tactics? The other aspect would be kind of tying in some of the other things that we've been talking about on the back end. How do you build an attribution system that tells you not only what is your sort of initial productivity, but over the lifetime of a client, what's their lifetime value, or a customer rather? How do you understand better what is it that they are delivering over not just an initial action, but multiple actions over a longer period of time? That's the customer that I ultimately want to reach. It's nice to have folks who are converting off the back end, completing a sale, a purchase, whatever it may be that you're tracking. But are they return customers? Do they buy more and more products? We work with an awesome speaker company that you all surely have heard of before. And they ultimately want to not only sell one speaker, they want to sell home theater systems. They want to sell the installation systems into a customer's house. That's the type of customer that's going to be more valuable. And if you don't have a way to track that lifetime performance, you're again probably missing out on some key signals that will contribute to your investment decisions on a placement level, ad level, channel level, whatever it may be.
Yeah, the deeper funnel, long-term metrics. Yeah, I know, and that might come into some of your thoughts too, Katie, from just a, I know we often talk in mobile because that's our heritage, and but notion of an app that only implements measurement of installs, which is essentially the first app open, but nothing else. And it's kind of like, oh shoot, you kind of shot yourself in the foot to a degree. You've got none of the deeper funnel activities like get registration implemented, get purchase, add to cart. But anyways, Katie, thoughts you have on best practices or tips?
Yeah, one, and I agree with all of Eli's points as well. And some additional ones there are just trying to use predictive modeling when it's available to be able to kind of predict that long-term value. So like at Kochava, we have a data science team that's created some models that can help us predict the likelihood that a device is going to continue to have activity in the event long-term. But they can help you predict that like as early as day 7, for instance. So then you can have those scores and you can use those scores as long as you can prove that the model is accurate, which we can do as well. You can use those scores then at day 7 to help make marketing adjustments to, you could do creative trackers, whatever. You have the scores at a device level, so you can use them to kind of help make changes to those decisions. But you can do that a little bit earlier, not like daily or hourly or anything, but at least, look at that on a weekly, bi-weekly, whatever level, just to see those scores and be able to make some adjustments earlier versus having to wait like 60, 90 days, like way farther out. Because if those can help you predict long-term value and you can have that earlier, then you can just not put a lot of your spend for a longer period of time and towards, creatives or devices that aren't going to perform long-term. So I think that's a key thing that we've found pretty valuable with customers. Also related to the fraud points that Eli mentioned, I think another thing that is good to do is when looking at fraud and figuring out what you want to cut for fraud, also incorporating make goods and IO language in all of the contracts that you have with partners to help protect you so that if certain things happen, like say there's too high of a CTI or there's a device that comes from, a device that's never been seen before across Kochava or something like that, that you can have that in the mix in your language that you're not going to pay for those. So then, you're not paying for those installs or clicks and impressions, like devices that are providing those clicks and impressions from devices that are not actual devices, things like that. So that can help you kind of cut your spend up front because you're not paying for all those ones that could be fraudulent. And the last thing I would say is we've kind of talked about different pricing models, pricing structures, all of that. And one thing I would say is really to focus in on that and really understand is there a network that is sending millions of impressions but no clicks? There's not a lot of installs happening, but they're paying a CPM, like a cost per impression instead of a cost per click, cost per install for that network. Because then you're paying for all those impressions that are not converting to anything. The network doesn't necessarily, care because they're getting paid on the impression level, not at the install level. So they're not maybe as concerned about the conversion. So really looking at the holistic view of all the ad signal, everything that you're getting, and your cost structure together to make sure that it is the most optimal cost structure, and to make adjustments if it's not, so that you are not, potentially paying for just clicks and impressions, things like that, that aren't actually going to attribute to installs.
Yeah, no, and I think just some of the things you mentioned, like, I think about impression frequency capping and just terms in your insertion orders. And I know that can seem pretty daunting to try and undertake that, but at Kochava, and I know certain other tools, but we've got like a tool called Traffic Verifier that you can use, and it can automate against certain thresholds. You set fraud block list we have that's global that can watch over campaigns. So to some degree, there's automation that can happen against some of those. So you're not trying to pull those levers in real time or monitor those things in reporting, rows, and then take action after the fact or clawbacks later from your partners. So if that is the state you're in right now, where it's a very manual, painstaking process, and you just almost throw it to the wind because it's too much to deal with, reach out. We can help you automate that to a good degree. So, thanks, Katie. Kevin, what are some best practices, tips, advice that you can share?
Averages and totals are misleading. If you have Bill Gates and I in the same room, you have 2 billionaires. You need to measure individually. Sure, you're going to segment and quantize based off of demographic and psychographic, but you have to have the row level data to make sure that it all makes sense. If you're a QSR brand in fast food and your average order is $30, make sure you don't have an order of 30,000 that is skewing the average. It's been known to happen. Ask yourself what parts of the order are going together, what frictions are there for the customer in unifying that order, but most importantly, is your marketing reflective of how people are actually using the app rather than the bait and switch? I saw a video recently that Plumber Strauss did for a company called Bolt. By the disclaimer, neither of these are my clients, but it actually showed the customer journey in it rather than just trying to be humorous and that kind of thing. And I think that will resonate, and the 200,000, 300,000 that they spent on that ad is going to do a lot more for them than doing turning on and off marketing every day, trying to find the right channel of acquisition. Micromanagement of campaigns is damaging. Patience is rewarded. Try to align with your finance and leadership team on a quarterly basis. Show them your ads, reenact the customer experience, identify the strengths and weaknesses of your funnel. Don't show them 10 pages of pivot tables. Show them the real marketing, which that kind of gets to my final thing on this. Like, we might be using computers, but this is still marketing. I have all the incentive to shill for computer science, data, and analytics. My degree's in engineering. But if you can't verbally explain your marketing outreach using performance channels, you don't have a marketing plan. If you have zero access to computers, could you still replicate your marketing plan with other mediums? Cutting and increasing spend shouldn't be a leap of faith. It should be results that are able to be forecasted within a measure of accuracy. We're working on a product here over at a Foundry called Insight Packs. And one of our subproducts of that, incremental intent, has a measurement on it called incremental CAC, or incremental customer acquisition cost. And what it tells people is, you might think you have a $15 CAC with one network and a $20 CAC with another, but the incremental CAC of the incremental network is going to be closer to like the same number, $15, and the non-incremental is now going to go by a factor of 3 or 4 more, meaning that how many dollars do you have to spend with this network to truly get in a vacuum one more customer, not one more download that will be attributed that they might over attribute, but genuine outreach. And what we've noticed with our clients who are facing budget cuts is that by focusing on incremental KPIs, we're able to ahead of time say, yes, if you spend 50% less with this network that is telling you they're bringing you 2,000 customers a month, you're going to lose 50 of them because most of it is non-incremental. They're actually, most of their installs would have fallen to organic or would have been claimed by other networks. They weren't resonating with the client. So I think all those in summary are kind of the best practices of be patient, ignore averages, don't micromanage, and can you verbally explain your marketing plan to a non-technical person? If you have all of those, even in a recession, you're going to kick butt.
I like that advice. That's a good kick butt. Well, and actually real quick, Andrew, who's our Zoom ops rep in the background here, would you mind displaying the poll results from that poll we took a while back? So interesting. Well, that's good. Nobody's got to cut their budget over 50%, at least not on this audience. So that would be a tough one. Looks like we got most in the 10 to 25% range. And then, yeah, I know some of the 25 to 50. I wonder if it's the 25 or the 50, but we had to bucket these somehow. So interesting. And under 5 is about a quarter. That's still a lot, but yeah. So I guess, yeah, to your point, Kevin, and then some of the points that you brought up, Katie, as well, and Eli, it sounds like there are good ways to trim budget, and there are bad ways. So maybe a good thing to do at this point, I'll close out these poll results, is we have a couple scenarios we put together. Some of them were based on some questions / comments that came in while folks were registering for this event. And then others were some that were from the backgrounds of the Foundry team here at Kochava. So I kind of would like to hit on each of these, and just maybe starting with you, Katie. Here's one budgeting scenario. We have a mid-level marketing manager with a decreased iOS budget in 2023, and this kind of sits in the realm of SKAdNetwork, which is another topic we've had multiple webinars about. But the SKAdNetwork, combined with the app tracking transparency framework and some of the privacy first focused initiatives on the whole iOS ecosystem, have decreased overall visibility. And we've seen this across the board, that a lot of times that means there's budget that it's shifted to Android. And so the question here is really the strategies and recommendations on how to best optimize on iOS, really within the constraints of the reporting layer and limited insights that you get through SKAdNetwork. Do you have any insights from your work with clients and how you'd advise somebody to approach that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, and this definitely is a hot topic that lots of clients are asking about right now and have been asking about since all this went into play. So it's definitely very relevant. One of the big things that has come out is just making sure that the data that is being sent by all the networks and all the publishers from that the networks are working with is as fulsome as possible, so that then you can use that data to your best ability to start making decisions. An example of this would be, we see sometimes that we don't get the partner campaign ID on the clicks that are coming in for SKAD. But we need that to be able to link that to the SKAD conversions. So without that partner campaign ID, there's certain analysis that we're not able to do. We're not able to link those and then start tying those to campaigns, et cetera. So it's really important to make sure that all of your networks are sending that information on the click. And if they're not, work with them to try to get them to adjust that and send that. So I think just kind of that fulsome data is very important. Along with that is understanding what version of SKAD your publishers are on. So the SKAD version is actually at the publisher level, not at the network level, but really diving in and understanding, are there publishers that are still on SKAD version 2 versus SKAD 3 or SKAD 4, because there are different ways that you're going to be able to use the reporting based on the version that they're on. And you may see some different trends like we've seen recently, where there's a publisher that had majority of their installs were on SKAD 2, and then they switched a few months ago. Most were SKAD 3, but now they're back to SKAD 2, and you kind of see this weird trend. And just trying to work with them to understand, because there are different ways you can analyze or different things that are available, between the different versions of SKAD that are, that you're working with. The other thing that I would say is with SKAD reporting, we've talked a lot about multi-touch attribution, things like that. With SKAD reporting, there is a layer where you can see, did the network win the install, or was it an influencer on the install? But you can only see that on SKAD version 3.0 or higher. So that's kind of another reason to potentially, make sure your networks are on a 3 or higher SKAD version. So you can only see that on that, but also the networks need to send that information for you to be able to, for like Kochava or something, to be able to see that. So it's in the network's control to send that flag, which is a did win flag, but to send that flag to say, is it true or false? And a lot of times we see that networks are not sending that flag, so they're just sending everything over. So then you have a little bit of a skewed view of, are all my installs actually installs that, were won, or were the installs that also, were influenced but weren't won? So I think just kind of diving into all of that, all those are really key to be able to understand more of your SKAD reporting.
Yeah. I know we've talked in other meetings too, Katie, of, outside this whole webinar planning too, just about, the conversion value model that you choose to implement, which is a whole nother discussion we won't dive into today. But depending on the KPIs, your vertical / industry, there's different ways that you can map notions of time or in-app event or retention type of insights into the conversion value calls that are made to SKAdNetwork that actually help you to see post-install insights, which didn't exist in SKAdNetwork V1 way back. That's what they added in V2. Then I think V3 was, they started showing the influencers you're talking about and some other iterative changes. And then V4 has got a whole nother slew of shifting changes to it as well. But no, thank you. This is insightful for this one. And
yeah, and one other thing to note too, just one other thing to note too here real quick was just that also, there's a certain level of conversions that need to be met before you're able to see the information in the SKAD reports out at a source app ID level. And so I think that's also important too, is just to look at just how many campaigns you're running on with, how many publishers are you running with under different networks, and really try to trim that down. So then hopefully you'll be able to get more conversions per publisher and be able to see more of that insight, because that's really important too, is being able to actually understand the apps that are being marketed on. Yeah, that's source app ID level, or now it'll be site ID as well soon for web, since there's web support coming with V4. We're getting close to time here, so let me jump into another scenario, and maybe Eli, would you like to chew into this one a bit? This one's notion of a programmatic media buyer facing 25% less budget here in 2023, and really looking at how they should focus, like in terms of metrics and things, in order to make sure that they're allocating their spend to the partners that'll give them the most bang for their buck. So that might be all part of that cycling question too, that or not question, but point you talked about earlier, Kevin, with cycling to find that answer. So any thoughts on that, Eli?
Yeah, and the way that we typically like to think about questions like this is sort of the planning, the present, and the future, where the planning are the things that happened before in terms of what we already know, our media mix, that kind of stuff. The present is when a customer comes in the door. It's kind of our point of reference for everything else, right? And then future is our look back. How do we know that we did the job that we need to do, and how do we use that information to move forward? So on the present, or the planning side rather, this ties in nicely a lot of the things that we already talked about. Traffic fraud, other quality metrics that we could look at, our historical learnings, the things that we have already established in terms of whether or not a certain investment is going to be a good one. Then we look at the present. This is things like we've already talked about in terms of that bright line of attribution. Are we able to know outside of last click how other portions of our funnel, how other tactics have assisted in the attribution of new users coming in the door? And then we look at the future. What are the mechanisms that we have, whether that's something like Kochava, something like an MMM, that gives us the longer tail views of this is the journey that the user took and how they continued on in relation with our brand. We look at these three components simultaneously, but understanding that we're not going to get some of those longer tail results until we've kind of gone through the motions a few times, to Kevin's point, cycled through some of these learnings, different tactics that we might employ, and have an understanding, a basis of what we're going to be able to get out of these different strategies. Ultimately, like everything, it's a test and learn. You have to be nimble, you have to be agile, to Kevin's point, not too quick to pull the trigger, and much more targeted and incremental in terms of how we approach things. But ultimately, that's often how we are approaching these scenarios where we know we have to cut, but we also know that the way that we're cutting will affect the bottom of the funnel, and we want to try to sustain or even grow as we're able to the outputs from these campaigns.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And if, we're going to jump into one more scenario here too, and maybe you can give your thoughts on this one, Kevin. If the audience has any questions, feel free to submit them through the Q&A now. We have a couple we'll bite off on that were submitted during registration. So one last, there's my mouse here. One last scenario. This one's an interesting one. I love your thoughts on, Kevin, in terms of when maybe a associate director of marketing has a different approach or opinion on how to navigate ad budget cuts than the CMO above them, and how you might go about reconciling that.
Absolutely. I'm going to kind of tackle this where that question gets a little answered at the end. So they're mentioning the highest cost in this question, highest cost network. Well, highest cost with regards to what? CPI? I don't use CPI. When I was VP marketing, the leadership team wouldn't get CPI in reports. That was for internal marketing purposes only. We shared with leadership top line numbers, marketing strategies, quarter over quarter changes, competitor updates, what we would do with our last dollar and where we'd grow our next dollar. And that's how my team also worked, in that all marketing managers have access to all data, even corporate financials. Nobody is competing on the same channel. Everyone collaborates. There's not competing for budget. Everyone must have a plan for where their last dollar should be cut and where their next dollar should be added. And when a breakthrough happens, similar to Toyota quality management, in which anyone on the assembly line can halt it and say, we have a problem here, there's something wrong. I also have everyone on my team the ability to call a meeting saying, I think we have a breakthrough. I'm getting some solid numbers on this. I made this change and this is happening. For example, switching from 30-second to 15-second video. And everyone must see, does this work and replicate on my chain? Because that's how we got competitive advantages, by identifying these things, not by having my Facebook manager compete with my DSP manager on getting the next dollars of budget. So that level of collaboration, that level of unification is how you get the harmony and everyone working together. You can't have a team with 12 people all competing against each other. You'll never get in.
Yeah. There's no I in team. Is that the old adage?
Yeah, but there is an ME.
Yeah. Well, cool. I want to bite off a couple of questions that we had come in here during registration. So one is, I think in essence you've already answered this to a degree, but it'd be good to reiterate, and that's the notion of, are there any channels I should focus on more than others when trimming my budget, or when being asked to trim my budget? I'm assuming the answer is probably no. You probably should cycle, but kind of like what you were talking to, Kevin. But do any one of you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, Branded search is the most overspent channel right now, which is a marketer complains that they are not getting data due to SKAd on Apple. So they spend all their money on Apple search. And what do they spend it on? Their branding. They were already going to find that anyway. The numbers will look good because those customers, like Eli has talked about in terms of the sales funnel, are already way down the line. You're not growing your marketing by doing that. So yes, you can cut brand spend, but notice how I'm saying this against Apple search ads just on brand spend. I think Apple search ads is a great product for conquest, for category. So there's definitely acquisition that can be had. But again, averages are misleading. Who are going to be your best customers? The ones that are already aware of the brand and have heard the value proposition are already seasoned. I mean, anyone in sales has a warm leads Rolodex of people that they could rely on. And that's who you're measuring. So don't confuse that with marketing growth.
Yeah, and I've even heard in some chatter the notion that, you know, brand on ASA or any search is, and for some looked at more as a support cost, right? They're not even looking at it as a performance budget anymore because of just the sheer scale of it. So they file it in a different silo to a degree, if you will. I don't know if that's a good thing, a bad thing, but it kind of makes sense given you're not really going to see or expect a bunch of incrementality from that.
If 90% of your marketing budget is going to support cost, ask yourself, if you do this for 6 months, are you going to have a job? Because there's going to be agencies and other people that could do that job far cheaper than you. Like, you're really limiting your knowledge and your abilities by clicking that button and just typing your company name there. Sure, have it, but don't be spending $30 for a customer that already knows your brand name and already saw your advertising. And worst of all, there's going to be less of them in the future because you're going to cut that upper level funnel. So now it's going to become even more expensive on Apple search ads. So I think you'll get immediate benefit from a performance perspective by, like, if you're just looking at raw numbers, by spending more on branded, and it's going to kill you months down the line.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. Eli, any thoughts?
Yeah, another piece of this that I think ties nicely with what Kevin was saying was, especially if you've been on the agency side, you're probably familiar with this, where we will often look at different channels, different placements through rose-colored glasses, because we're trying to find the nooks and crannies of success and do some testing and prove out something. But I think we often have to be realists in terms of aligning the strengths of a channel or placement with the portion of the funnel that they're meant to be servicing. Not everything is good for everything, and we have to be realistic about that. So if you are investing in channels that you want to be a branding channel, but it's just inherently not that, that's an easy one to go and say, okay, well, we're probably wasting some dollars here. We can allocate that to something that's playing more to the strength of the channel or the placement, versus trying to stretch the utility of a specific ad type.
Yeah, and I would add to that, totally agree with Kevin and Eli's points. The other thing that we've noticed too is just really wanting to focus on own media, like smart links, things like that, and trying to make sure that you're optimizing that to your best ability, deep linking to the app, things like that, to really, like, make sure those experiences are the best for the customer, and to their points, to whatever experience you're trying to get, and deep linking to the right page, things like that. So just making sure that those strategies on your own media, since you already own those customers, those strategies are also kind of set to be able to give that own media the best bite at the apple, and then, you know, the rest will fall into place as well. So
yeah, well, we are right at the finish line, so we will end the questions there. If you did submit a question through registration and we didn't get to it, feel free to follow up with us by email. And Eli, thanks for joining us from Real Time Agency. Katie and Kevin from the Foundry crew, appreciate it. And I hope that everyone in attendance finds some really good nuggets they can apply to their own budget cutting strategy from this whole event. So thank you for joining us, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Yep, have a good one.
Jeff.
thank you.
Bye-bye.